From fairy tale wedding to Hollywood exile, the story of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle has unfolded like a drama written in chapters of scandal, contradictions, and carefully curated imagery. To many, they were once the golden couple, a breath of fresh air in an aging institution. But to others, they became a cautionary tale. How love, publicity, and rebellion could twist the House of Windsor into knots it may never untangle. The image of their union, once presented as modern, global, and progressive, has given way to another, more biting question. Has Harry, once the spare to the heir, become a spare in his own marriage? This narrative did not erupt overnight. It was years in the making, layered with moments that seemed tender on the surface but revealed deeper power dynamics when studied closely. Photographers captured the hand-holding, the smiles, the gentle rubs of the arm. But as body language expert Judy James observed, Meghan's touch is not just reassurance. It is often a signal of control, a way of leading Harry through the frame. Even in their earliest appearances together, what seemed like affection was also performance, and performance always has a director. Let us return to September 2017, Toronto, Canada. The Invictus Games, a competition founded by Harry himself to honor wounded servicemen and women, was underway. It was his proudest achievement, a cause tied directly to his military career and identity. But this year, the event became something more. After weeks of speculation, Harry and Meghan appeared together in public for the first time. They sat side by side, holding hands, whispering, touching shoulders. For a royal couple, this was astonishing. Traditionally, the Windsors avoided overt displays of affection at official events. William and Catherine had famously maintained a cool, almost professional distance during their early engagements. Even Charles and Diana, in their most public moments, seemed restrained. Yet here were Harry and Meghan, tactile, demonstrative, making a statement. As one commentator in The Telegraph noted at the time, this was not just a date. It was a declaration. The message was, "We are different, we are modern, and we do not care about the old rules." Meghan, wearing ripped jeans and a white shirt, looked casual, American, unbothered by protocol. Harry, on the other hand, seemed protective, leaning toward her, scanning the crowd as if shielding her from the intensity of the cameras. Their chemistry was obvious, but so was their defiance. Weeks earlier, Meghan had already bent protocol by speaking openly to Vanity Fair about their relationship. On the cover, under the bold headline, "She's just wild about Harry," Meghan told the world, "We're two people who are really happy and in love." For royal watchers, this was shocking. Traditionally, girlfriends of royals kept silent until engagement. Catherine, during her decade-long courtship with William, never gave such an interview. The palace was reportedly furious. Even Harry, behind the scenes, was unsettled. In his memoir Spare, he recalled the backlash. The palace reacted with fury. They said it was a disaster, a breach of the unspoken rules. "I was torn. I wanted Meghan to be herself, but I also knew what it meant to cross that invisible line." This was the first sign of what would define their relationship. Meghan speaking boldly, Harry reacting defensively, and the institution scrambling to keep up. It also foreshadowed the imbalance to come. Meghan, the actress, was comfortable in front of cameras, skilled in delivering lines, adept at playing the audience. Harry, the soldier turned royal, was less polished, less secure. Together, their dynamic leaned toward Meghan leading the show, and Harry following. 2 months later, in November 2017, the couple officially announced their engagement. The photo call at Kensington Palace's sunken garden was carefully staged. Meghan clutched Harry's hand, then doubled her grip, wrapping both hands around his in what body language analysts later called the double clutch. Judy James explained, "This is a classic gesture of possession. It says, 'He's mine. I'm holding on. I'm in control.'" Harry, meanwhile, stood stiff, his other hand tucked into his jacket, a posture reminiscent of his father, Charles, who often posed that way in awkward moments. While Meghan smiled broadly, seemingly at ease, Harry's smile appeared forced, nervous. Meghan rubbed his arm, a gesture of comfort, but one that also emphasized the imbalance. It was as if she was both partner and caretaker, wife and mother rolled into one. Royal observers quickly noted the contrast with William and Catherine's engagement photo call years earlier. William had stood confidently, leading the interaction, while Catherine looked shy, deferential, allowing him to take the stage. With Harry and Meghan, the roles seemed reversed. Behind the scenes, not everything was smooth. According to Spare, William had warned Harry that the relationship was moving too fast. Harry bristled at the interference, but the seeds of fraternal tension were sown. The brothers, once inseparable, began to diverge not just in choices of partners, but in visions of what royal life should be. In December 2017, Meghan joined the royal family at Sandringham for Christmas, another break with tradition, since fiancés usually weren't included until after marriage. Photographers captured the Fab Four: William, Catherine, Harry, and Meghan walking to church together. The media hailed them as the future of the monarchy, but insiders whispered of awkwardness. Meghan was seen chatting confidently, perhaps too confidently, with senior royals. As one aide told The Times, she wasn't shy. She wasn't deferential. She was an American actress, used to interviews, used to the spotlight. It was refreshing, but it also ruffled feathers. The early months of 2018 only heightened the sense that Meghan was setting the pace. At public events, she leaned into Harry, guiding him, touching his back, holding his hand tightly. He often looked tense, scanning crowds, while she smiled broadly. Body language analysts pointed out that Meghan often used what they called the steering gesture, placing her hand on Harry's arm or back to subtly direct him. "It's a very maternal move," one expert told Daily Mail. "It shows care, but it also shows dominance." In March 2018, during a visit to Belfast, Meghan broke another unwritten rule. Speaking to a woman about baby products, she casually hinted, "I'm sure at some point we'll need all this." The press erupted with speculation about pregnancy. For royals, such comments were rare. Catherine had never spoken so openly before her official announcements. Again, Meghan was writing her own script, and Harry was forced to follow along. By the time their wedding approached in May 2018, the pattern was clear. Meghan was confident, direct, unafraid to break rules. Harry was protective, loyal, but increasingly in her shadow. What began as a love story was already a power story. The fairy tale shimmered on the surface: carriage rides, hand-holding, shared smiles, but the cracks were forming beneath. William's warnings, the Vanity Fair cover, Meghan's comfort in front of cameras, Harry's stiffness, all pointed toward a dynamic that would only intensify. As one palace insider confided years later, from the beginning, Harry was never leading. Meghan was. He didn't realize it at first, but he had swapped roles. He wasn't just the spare to the heir anymore. He was becoming the spare to his wife. By May 2018, the fairy tale image had reached its peak. The world was preparing for a royal wedding that promised to be unlike any other. The anticipation was electric. Newspapers sold glossy pull-out sections. American broadcasters camped outside Windsor Castle. Commentators from both sides of the Atlantic gushed about the symbolism. A biracial American actress marrying the son of Princess Diana. "This is history in the making," CNN declared. "It's the storybook ending we've all been waiting for." But beneath the surface, not all was well. Even before the first chords of the wedding march echoed through St. George's Chapel, tensions and cracks were beginning to show. The wedding itself was, on the surface, dazzling. Meghan, radiant in a Givenchy gown designed by Claire Waite Keller, walked down the aisle alone before being joined by Prince Charles, a symbolic gesture that earned praise. The dress was sleek, modern, minimalist, and devoid of heavy embellishment. But it was also, according to one guest, surprisingly audacious. Lady Elizabeth Anson, a cousin of the Queen, later revealed that the monarch herself thought the gown too white, flamboyantly virginal for a divorcee. The Queen's comment, whispered in private, captured the unease. Meghan was not just a bride. She was a statement, and not everyone agreed with its message. Even the wedding vows contained subtle signals. As Harry slid the ring onto Meghan's finger, Meghan placed her other hand firmly over his. Some body language experts saw it as reassurance, a steadying touch for a nervous groom. But others read it differently. An assertion of dominance, a physical way of showing she was guiding him through the most public moment of his life. It was as if she was saying, "I've got this, Harry. Follow my lead," said Judy James. The ceremony was also notable for its cultural departures. The sermon by Bishop Michael Curry electrified the chapel with its fiery passion and American-style delivery rarely heard in the restrained context of a royal service. Some guests applauded, others winced. A few senior royals reportedly muttered afterward that it felt more Hollywood than holy. But the crowd outside loved it, cheering and waving flags as Harry and Meghan departed in a horse-drawn carriage, basking in their apparent triumph. Yet behind the scenes, storm clouds were already forming. Meghan's father, Thomas Markle, had been caught in a tabloid sting, staging paparazzi photos for cash. Days before the wedding, he pulled out, citing health issues. Meghan released a statement. "Sadly, my father will not be attending our wedding. I have always cared for him and hope he can be given the space he needs to focus on his health." The moment earned sympathy but also set the tone for ongoing family drama that would dog the couple for years. Other controversies swirled around the preparations. Meghan reportedly clashed with Angela Kelly, the Queen's dresser, over access to tiaras. Meghan wanted a particular sparkling piece. The Queen said no. According to journalist Robert Jobson, Charles himself intervened, warning Harry, "She can't have whatever she wants." Harry's alleged retort, later leaked to the press, was explosive. "What Meghan wants, Meghan gets." That phrase became a headline, cementing the image of a groom utterly besotted and willing to challenge his family for his bride. There were more clashes, some small, some lasting. Meghan's relationship with Catherine soured around the time of the bridesmaids' dress fittings. British tabloids first reported that Meghan made Kate cry over the outfits. Meghan later told Oprah Winfrey in 2021 that the opposite had happened, the reverse happened. "She was upset about the flower girl dresses and she made me cry. Then she brought me flowers and apologized." The contradiction fueled endless debate, leaving observers wondering who was telling the truth and who was weaponizing the narrative. The wedding day itself, despite its pageantry, could not erase the simmering tensions. Meghan dazzled millions, yes, but she also disrupted traditions. The carriage ride through Windsor showed a glowing couple, yet insiders whispered about shouting matches over tiaras and tears in the palace. Even the body language on the balcony during Trooping the Colour weeks later seemed telling. Meghan reached for Harry, clutching his hand, while he stood stiffly, looking distracted. To some, it was affection. To others, it was the start of a clinginess that signaled imbalance. Harry, for his part, was caught between joy and unease. In Spare, he admitted he felt swept along by the speed and intensity of the wedding build-up. William's earlier warnings still echoed in his mind. "He said it was too soon," Harry wrote. "He told me to slow down. He was wrong, but the damage was done." William, increasingly concerned, was seen by some as cold. Yet from another angle, he was the brother trying to protect Harry from a whirlwind he barely understood. Meghan, meanwhile, leaned into her role with poise and confidence. In interviews, she reflected on her wedding as a dream come true. "It was incredible," she said later. "It was an outpouring of love and support." But behind those words was another truth. She was no longer just Meghan Markle, actress. She was the Duchess of Sussex, stepping into the most scrutinized family in the world, and she was determined to do it on her terms. The cracks, however, were undeniable. From tiara battles to tears at dress fittings, from the Queen's private comments to Harry's desperate defense, the narrative was shifting. This was not a fairy tale without flaws. This was a fairy tale with fault lines. As commentator Andrew Morton observed, the wedding was glorious theater. But it was also the curtain rising on a drama that would soon spiral out of control. The couple rode off through Windsor to cheers and confetti, but behind the cheers lurked silence, discontent, and whispers of rebellion. The tiara sparkled, the dress shimmered, but the cracks behind the crown were already too deep to ignore. If the royal wedding was theater, then the Australian tour was the sequel that shocked even the critics. It was October 2018, just 5 months after the tiara sparkled and the carriage rolled through Windsor. Now the Duke and Duchess of Sussex were embarking on their first major overseas tour together, a marathon of engagements across Australia, Fiji, Tonga, and New Zealand. It was a chance to showcase the modern royals to the Commonwealth, to prove that Harry and Meghan were more than just a wedding spectacle. And for a time, it worked. The images that emerged from that tour were some of the most striking of their marriage, glowing, tactile, confident. But beneath those images, the power dynamic was shifting in ways few could ignore. The tour began with a bombshell. Within hours of landing in Sydney, the couple announced that Meghan was pregnant with their first child. The news electrified the press. Crowds swelled. Headlines screamed, "Royal baby joy." The announcement was carefully timed, coming just before the couple greeted well-wishers outside Admiralty House. Meghan cradled her barely visible bump. Harry beamed, but insiders later whispered that the timing was strategic, designed to amplify the attention and guarantee front-page coverage for the rest of the tour. It was perfect PR, wrote royal biographer Tom Bower. A global spotlight was instantly secured, and the narrative was reset. Meghan was not just a duchess, she was the mother of a future royal child. At first, the dynamic looked balanced. Harry, on home turf as a seasoned public speaker, gave heartfelt addresses. Meghan, new to the royal stage, appeared attentive and supportive. But as the days passed, the imagery began to tell a different story. During one speech in Dubbo, torrential rain poured down as Harry spoke to a crowd of farmers. Meghan stood beside him, holding an umbrella to shield him from the storm. To some, it was touching, intimate, a wife protecting her husband. To others, it was symbolic. The Daily Telegraph called it the perfect metaphor. Meghan in the spotlight, literally above Harry, making herself central to the moment that was supposed to be his. The umbrella moment became iconic. She looked like a maternal figure, not just a partner, body language expert Judy James observed. It suggested Harry was being cared for, guided. Meghan was playing the star and the support act simultaneously. The press photos cemented the impression. Harry, head bent under the rain, Meghan standing tall, smiling under the flashbulbs, umbrella in hand. Other moments reinforced this reversal. Meghan often used the hand sandwich gesture, clasping Harry's hand with both of hers. Judy James called it the strongest form of handholding. It gives the appearance of unity but also signals control. Royal correspondents began to note that Meghan was leading Harry through crowds, rather than the other way around. One reporter from The Times wrote, "Usually it is the royal who introduces the spouse, guiding them through the throng. With the Sussexes, it was reversed. Meghan was the confident one, Harry the hesitant." The tour also displayed Meghan's ability to connect with crowds in a way that startled courtiers. Her American warmth, direct eye contact, and tactile gestures won cheers. She hugged children, shook hands for longer than expected, and crouched down to speak eye level with admirers. It was natural, charismatic, and disruptive. Traditionally, royals maintained a polite distance, preserving mystique. Meghan ignored that script. "I think it was the first time the family saw just how good she was at the job," Harry later told Oprah. "It was electrifying. People loved her, and that scared them." The idea of jealousy within the royal ranks became one of Harry's most explosive claims. In the Oprah interview of 2021, he said, "My father, my brother, the rest of my family, they were really welcoming at first. But everything changed after the Australia tour. It was the first time they got to see how incredible she is at the job. And suddenly, things shifted. For Harry, the tour was proof that Meghan was a superstar. For the palace, it was proof that she was a threat." But the admiration was not universal. Some critics in the British press accused Meghan of upstaging her husband. Headlines began to question whether she was using the tour to build her own brand. "She behaves more like a celebrity than a duchess," wrote columnist Jan Moyer. "It's Hollywood charisma, but is it royal duty?" The double standard was glaring. Diana had once been praised for similar warmth, but Meghan was portrayed as attention-seeking. Still, the seeds of suspicion had been sown. Even within the family, friction simmered. William, watching from London, was reportedly uneasy about the headlines. Catherine, still adjusting after giving birth to Prince Louis earlier that year, was compared unfavorably in tabloids to Meghan's glamorous pregnancy glow. Courtiers whispered about two duchesses, two styles, and warned of competition. The Fab Four, branding once used to describe William, Catherine, Harry, and Meghan, was beginning to fracture. Meghan, however, leaned into the spotlight. Her speeches were polished, her outfits curated for maximum effect. In Fiji, she wore a flowing blue gown reminiscent of Diana, inviting comparisons that delighted her fans but unsettled traditionalists. "She knows exactly what she's doing," one palace aide told The Sun. "Every move, every outfit is designed for resonance." Harry, meanwhile, looked increasingly tense. His protective hand on Meghan's back, a gesture once seen as his dominance, now appeared more like reassurance for himself. Yet the tour's success was undeniable. Crowds lined the streets. Newspapers around the world splashed their photos on front pages. Approval ratings for the Sussexes soared. For a moment, it seemed they had captured the magic of Diana and Charles's early tours, except this time, the spotlight was squarely on Meghan. But with success came scrutiny. Meghan's willingness to break protocol, her dominance in body language, her star quality, these traits that won applause in Sydney and Suva were viewed differently in London. What was endearing abroad was threatening at home. The Australian tour had made Meghan a star. It had also, according to Harry, marked the beginning of the royal family's shift from welcome to wariness. As Tom Bower wrote in Revenge, the tour was the turning point. It was when Meghan realized she could command the stage, and when the palace realized she might not be willing to share it. The images from that tour remain iconic. Meghan under the umbrella, Meghan cradling her bump, Meghan clasping Harry's hand with both of hers. But to those watching closely, the message was clear. Harry, once the soldier prince in command, was becoming the supporting act. Meghan was rising and Harry was sliding into the shadows. And as the tour concluded, the couple returned to London not just as newlyweds, but as a phenomenon. Their star was ascendant, their popularity undeniable. But for the House of Windsor, popularity was not a blessing. It was a threat, and the cracks that began at the wedding would soon split wide open. The fairy tale was becoming a contest, and the fracture lines would lead straight into the storm of 2019. The glow of the Australian tour did not last long. If 2018 had ended with applause and adoration, 2019 began with a different tone. Fractures behind the polished facade, rumors of rifts, and signs that the golden couple were slipping into stormier waters. What had once looked like a modern fairy tale now showed hints of tragedy and perhaps inevitability. The year began with whispers of tension within the so-called Fab Four. William, Catherine, Harry, and Meghan had been branded by the press as the future of the monarchy, a dynamic young quartet destined to modernize the crown. But by early 2019, the branding had soured. Reports circulated that the couples were no longer aligned. Meghan and Harry announced they would split from the joint household they once shared with William and Catherine at Kensington Palace, establishing their own office at Buckingham Palace instead. The move, though explained as logistical, was widely seen as symbolic. The Sussexes were breaking away not just administratively but emotionally. The cracks became visible in their public appearances. At Trooping the Colour in June 2019, the balcony of Buckingham Palace looked less like a united family and more like a tableau of icy distance. Meghan stood slightly behind, clutching Harry's arm, her smile fixed. Harry, stiff and awkward, looked tense. Catherine and William, positioned apart, avoided direct interaction. The image captured the reality. The Fab Four were fractured, and no amount of choreographed smiles could disguise it. Behind the scenes, tensions simmered further. In Spare, Harry would later write about arguments with William, describing one confrontation in 2019 as physical. "He grabbed me by the collar, ripping my necklace, and knocked me to the floor," Harry claimed, adding that the fight was over Meghan. William, according to Harry, had called her difficult and rude. The scene painted a picture of two brothers not just divided but in open conflict. Buckingham Palace, of course, declined to comment, but the revelation years later confirmed what many suspected: the brotherly bond was breaking under the weight of Meghan's presence. If family fractures defined the spring, The South Africa tour in the autumn of 2019 revealed the flight instinct that would shape the Sussexes' future. On the surface, the tour was another success. Meghan hugged children, Harry spoke passionately about conservation, and the couple smiled for the cameras. But behind those smiles was visible strain. In a now-famous interview with journalist Tom Bradby for ITV, Meghan admitted to struggling with royal life. "Thank you for asking, because not many people have asked if I'm okay," she told Bradby, her eyes glistening. "It's a very real thing to be going through behind the scenes." The words resonated with some, but they also sparked controversy. Critics asked why Meghan was lamenting her hardships while standing in some of the poorest communities in the world. The juxtaposition was uncomfortable. A duchess, wealthy and adored, publicly voicing her pain against a backdrop of poverty. For supporters, it was bravery; for detractors, it was tone deaf. Harry, too, used the moment to reveal his unhappiness. In the same documentary, he admitted that he and William were on different paths. It was a startling admission, and one that seemed to confirm the tabloid headlines of a feud. "We're brothers," he said. "We'll always be brothers. We're certainly on different paths at the moment, but I'll always be there for him, and as I know he'll always be there for me." The words were meant to reassure, but they rang hollow. The very need to say them out loud proved how dire the situation had become. Adding to the turbulence was an anecdote Meghan later shared in her podcast Archetypes. She revealed that during the South Africa tour, just before a scheduled engagement, they had been told that Archie's nursery had caught fire. There was no smoke detector. "Someone just happened to smell smoke down the hallway," she said. "Everyone was in tears, everyone was shaken. And what did we have to do? Go out and do another official engagement. I said, this doesn't make any sense." The story underscored their resentment. To them, the firm prioritized duty over their child's safety. To critics, it sounded like another grievance layered onto the pile. Christmas 2019 offered no reprieve. The Sussexes skipped Sandringham altogether, spending the holidays in Canada instead. The message was clear. The traditional family gathering had lost its appeal, or perhaps its meaning. Royal insiders admitted that the Queen was disappointed but not surprised. The optics, however, were damaging. A family known for its rituals suddenly had a glaring absence. Harry and Meghan were already half a world away, preparing for something bigger than a holiday break. By January 2020, the fracture had become flight. The Sussexes stunned the world by announcing on Instagram that they intended to step back as senior royals, split their time between the UK and North America, and seek financial independence. The statement reportedly blindsided the Queen and Charles. The palace scrambled to respond, releasing its own carefully worded note that made clear nothing had been agreed. The tension spilled into the public eye. Harry described the moment in spare. "We were told we couldn't do part-time. That was the choice. All in, or all out. We wanted to serve the Queen, the Commonwealth, but also live with more freedom. The family said no, so we left." The announcement, quickly dubbed Megxit, sent shockwaves through Britain. For some, it was betrayal. For others, liberation. Meghan, speaking to Oprah in 2021, framed it as survival. "We didn't want to just survive. We wanted to thrive." In the days following the announcement, photographers captured Harry and Meghan at Kenyatta House in London, smiling as if a burden had been lifted. Just weeks later, in March 2020, the couple made their final royal appearance at the Commonwealth Day service at Westminster Abbey. The atmosphere was frosty. William and Catherine barely exchanged words with them. Meghan's emerald green dress and confident stare contrasted sharply with Harry's tense demeanor. It was their goodbye to the monarchy, staged in front of the cameras. The most iconic image from that period, however, was taken at Mansion House just days earlier. Under pouring rain, the Sussexes walked together, lit by a single flash of blue light that reflected off Meghan's dress. They smiled at each other as if they were walking into a new dawn. The photo went viral. Supporters called it cinematic, symbolic of their resilience. Critics called it contrived, another example of their ability to stage-manage every moment. But symbolism was the point. In that photograph, Harry and Meghan weren't just leaving. They were performing their exit. They weren't just walking away from the firm. They were walking toward the cameras, ensuring the narrative belonged to them. As Robert Lacey put it in Battle of Brothers, the Sussexes did not just resign from the monarchy. They choreographed their departure. The fractures had turned into a full-blown flight, and as the pandemic loomed, Harry and Meghan would begin their new life in California armed with contracts, interviews, and the determination to redefine their roles. But for Harry, the question remained. Had he escaped the shadow of the monarchy, only to step into a new shadow, the one cast by his wife's growing dominance? The departure was staged in the rain, all cinematic light and knowing smiles. But when the cameras stopped flashing, Harry and Meghan's new reality began. By the spring of 2020, they were no longer working royals. The carefully orchestrated farewell at Westminster Abbey had ended in frost and silence, and the Sussexes boarded flights across the Atlantic, seeking what they called financial independence. Canada was their first refuge, but California quickly became the true destination. In the sun-drenched hills of Montecito, far from Sandringham's fog and the press pack that haunted Windsor, they set up home. On paper, it was liberation. No more bowing to palace courtiers, no more archaic protocols about tights or tiaras, no more being told what they could and could not say. They were free, at least in theory. But with freedom came expectation, and with expectation came scrutiny. The same couple who once demanded privacy were now negotiating multi-million-dollar contracts with Netflix, Spotify, and publishers eager to hear their story. The paradox was glaring. Escaping the monarchy by stepping into an even brighter spotlight. Harry would later try to frame the decision as necessity. In his interview with Oprah Winfrey in March 2021, he said bluntly, "My family literally cut me off financially in the first quarter of 2020. I've got what my mum left me, and without that we wouldn't have been able to do this." It was a stunning admission. For some, it elicited sympathy. For others, it sounded tone-deaf. Here was a prince in a Montecito mansion worth millions, complaining of being cut off. Meghan, sitting beside him during that same interview, made even more explosive claims. She revealed she had suffered suicidal thoughts during her time as a working royal. "I just didn't want to be alive anymore," she said, her voice breaking. She alleged that when she sought help, the palace refused. "I went to the institution, and I said that I needed to go somewhere to get help. I was told that I couldn't, that it wouldn't be good for the institution." It was a devastating charge, one that framed the monarchy not just as cold, but as cruelly negligent. But the most shocking moment came when Meghan alleged that there had been conversations within the family about Archie's skin color. "In those months when I was pregnant, there were concerns and conversations about how dark his skin might be when he was born," she told Oprah. Harry later confirmed that the remark was made to him, though he refused to name the family member. The accusation reverberated across the world. Buckingham Palace responded with a rare public statement. "While some recollections may vary, they are taken very seriously and will be addressed by the family privately." The words, "some recollections may vary," became infamous, seen by supporters as gaslighting, by critics as dignified restraint. The Oprah interview was a turning point. It secured sympathy in America, where many saw the couple as victims of an archaic, racially insensitive institution. But in Britain, the tide of opinion shifted. Polls showed their popularity plunging. To detractors, they looked disloyal, hypocritical, willing to trash their family for ratings. The Times ran the headline, "Sussexes burn bridges in pursuit of freedom." And yet, the contradictions only grew. Meghan told Oprah she had been silenced during her time as a royal. "I wasn't allowed to speak. They wouldn't let me have my voice." Yet within months, she was narrating her own story on a global stage, commanding one of the most watched interviews in television history. Harry, too, insisted he craved privacy, but soon after was announcing his memoir, pointedly titled Spare, promising raw revelations. Even their Netflix docuseries in 2022 was riddled with inconsistencies. In their engagement interview back in 2017, they described meeting on a blind date, Meghan saying she had only asked one question: "Is he nice?" But in the Netflix series, they admitted they had FaceTimed before their first date. The contradiction was glaring. Why omit such a detail in the beginning, only to reveal it later when it fit the new narrative? Critics pounced. It's impossible to keep up with their shifting versions of events, wrote Janice Turner in The Times. They are authors of their own myth, but even myths need consistency. Other discrepancies emerged around their departure. Harry told Oprah that they had not blindsided the Queen with their decision to step back. "I would never blindside my grandmother," he insisted. Yet palace insiders maintained otherwise, saying the announcement on Instagram had been a shock. William, according to courtiers quoted in Robert Lacey's Battle of Brothers, was incandescent with rage. Even in their visual imagery, the contradictions were stark. Consider the Time 100 cover in September 2021. Meghan stood front and center in bright white, her arms folded confidently. Harry, dressed in black, stood behind her shoulder, half hidden, almost like an accessory. Social media erupted with memes. One quipped that Harry looked like a hairdresser asking if she liked her cut. Another said he looked like the spare in his own marriage. The photograph was supposed to symbolize power and unity. Instead, it crystallized the growing perception that Meghan was the dominant partner, and Harry was the supporting act. For Harry, this perception cut deep. In Spare, released in early 2023 but largely written during this period, he admitted, "I was the shadow, the spare, the one expected to give way. Now I was free, but freedom felt like another kind of exile." He described therapy sessions, moments of anger, and his lingering resentment toward William. Yet he also painted Meghan as his savior, the one who gave him a voice. "She saved me, she gave me purpose. Without her, I would have been lost." Commentators saw irony. He left a family system where he was the spare to William, only to step into a marriage where he increasingly looked like the spare to Meghan. As Tom Bauer observed, Harry escaped the hierarchy of the crown only to submit to the hierarchy of his wife's ambition. Meanwhile, the couple's media ventures wobbled. Their Spotify podcast Archetypes launched in 2022 with strong initial numbers but soon faltered. By 2023, the deal collapsed, with Spotify executive Bill Simmons calling them F***ing grifters on his own podcast. Netflix, too, faced questions. The couple's docuseries drew eyeballs, yes, but the long-term partnership looked shaky. The brand that promised to thrive outside the palace was already showing cracks of its own. And yet, the contradictions did not end their allure. Every revelation sparked new headlines. Every inconsistency generated more debate. The Sussexes had discovered the formula. Even when you contradict yourself, the drama itself sustains attention. By the end of 2022, Harry and Meghan had become less royal couple and more Hollywood franchise, a mixture of confessional interviews, streaming content, and carefully curated photo shoots. They had escaped the firm, but they had not escaped the spotlight. They had left the monarchy, but they had not left monarchy behind. They carried it with them, commodified it, repackaged it, and sold it to the highest bidder. As Andrew Neil, the veteran broadcaster, wrote in the Daily Mail, they say they wanted privacy. What they wanted was control. And control, as they are learning, is a slippery thing. The Hollywood exile was freedom, but it was also performance. It was independence, but also dependence on contracts, on narratives, on public sympathy. And as their contradictions piled up, one truth became harder to ignore. Harry was no longer just the spare to the heir. He was becoming the spare to the Sussex brand itself. The stage was set for the next act, a memoir that would tear open wounds, deepen divides, and reveal just how far the prince had drifted from the palace and from himself. When Harry's memoir Spare landed in January 2023, it was supposed to be his emancipation. The book was marketed as a raw, unflinching confession, a chance for the prince long trapped in the shadows to finally tell his story in his own words. Penguin Random House promised honesty and humanity, while Harry himself said in interviews, "I'm writing this not as the prince I was born, but as the man I have become." It was his attempt to seize control of a narrative that had been written for him since birth. But if Harry wanted to define himself, Spare also redefined him, just not in the way he may have intended. The memoir's title alone cemented the role he had long resented. the expendable one, the backup, the insurance policy for the heir. The book's opening anecdote was chilling in its simplicity. Harry recalled being told as a child that he was the spare to William's heir. 2 children were necessary, he wrote. The heir and the spare. One to provide continuity, and the other, if necessary, spare parts. That sense of disposability fueled the book's pages. He recounted William's temper, Charles's distance, Camilla's machinations. He accused the press of collusion with palace aides. He described, in intimate and often graphic detail, his grief, his drug use, even the frostbite on his todger during a trip to the North Pole. The candor was startling, but so too was the backlash. Some readers praised the honesty. Sales soared 1.43 million copies in its first day in the UK, US, and Canada combined, making it the fastest-selling nonfiction book in history. Others recoiled. Royal historian Hugo Vickers called it a monumental act of self-sabotage. Even sympathetic journalists admitted the detail was overwhelming. The problem with confession, wrote Alison Pearson in The Telegraph, is that it can quickly become overexposure. The contradictions also resurfaced. Harry insisted he wanted reconciliation with his family, telling Anderson Cooper on 60 Minutes, "I would like to get my father back. I would like to have my brother back." Yet page after page of Spare contained accusations guaranteed to deepen divides. William was painted as a bully, Charles as emotionally absent, Camilla as scheming for press approval. Reconciliation seemed less like a desire and more like a rhetorical shield. For Meghan, the memoir's release was both opportunity and complication. She largely stayed in the background, issuing no formal statements, but the book's content inevitably tied her to Harry's grievances. Critics said she had encouraged his candor. Supporters argued she had wisely avoided the limelight. But the optics remained. Harry, even in his own memoir, was defined in relation to his wife's presence or absence. The irony grew sharper as 2023 unfolded. While Spare cemented Harry's role as the spare in the royal narrative, his appearances alongside Meghan increasingly framed him as the spare in their marriage dynamic as well. This was particularly evident during their quasi-royal trip to Colombia in late 2023. Invited by Vice President Francia Marquez after she reportedly watched the Sussexes' Netflix series, the visit was orchestrated with diplomatic pomp. Photographs showed Harry and Meghan posing with Marquez in what looked like official state engagements. Yet observers couldn't help but notice the imbalance. Body language expert Judy James remarked, Harry adopts the fig leaf pose, hands clasped in front, shoulders slightly hunched. It's a gesture of defensiveness, even shyness. Meghan, by contrast, stands front and center, confident, animated. The contrast is stark. Social media commentary was even less forgiving. One viral tweet quipped, Harry looks like the +1 at Meghan's royal tour. The photographs told a story. Meghan, radiant in bold colors, speaking confidently, shaking hands, smiling for the cameras. Harry, subdued, often in the background, his expressions ranging from forced smiles to visible unease. It was a reversal of roles. Once the soldier prince commanding adoration, he now looked like the supporting act in Meghan's show. The perception wasn't limited to body language. Their joint projects faltered in ways that undercut Harry's voice. Spotify canceled their deal in 2023, with executive Bill Simmons sneering on his podcast, The F***ing Grifters. That's the podcast we should have launched. Netflix, while still in partnership, scaled back expectations. Meghan hinted at lifestyle ventures, possibly even a return to acting or producing. Harry, meanwhile, focused on the Invictus Games and his late mother's legacy. The split in interests made sense strategically but also made headlines about professional separation. By 2024, the pattern was unmistakable. Harry's solo appearances in New York, attending the Well Child Awards in London, and delivering speeches connected to Princess Diana's legacy were received warmly. He looked more relaxed, more at ease without Meghan at his side. He seems freer, one attendee at the Well Child Awards told People. More natural, less rehearsed. In contrast, Meghan's solo work speeches at conferences, the continuation of her podcasting ambitions, and rumored brand deals cast her as independent, ambitious, and in control of her image. Insiders in California told The Times that Meghan had decided their brand was better served by pursuing separate projects. They will still do charitable engagements together, but work-wise they're going solo. Meghan wants to build her own platform. Harry is focusing on Invictus and Diana. The report fueled speculation. Was the Sussex brand splintering, or simply evolving? Commentators, however, saw a deeper irony. Harry had spent decades railing against being the spare to William. Now, free of that burden, he had slipped into another version of it, the spare, in his own marriage's power dynamic. As Tom Quinn, author of Scandals of the Royal Family, put it, Harry wanted out of one hierarchy, but he ended up in another. He's not the heir to Meghan, of course, but he often looks like the supporting player in her production. The public's perception followed. Memes circulated comparing the couple to George and Amal Clooney, except with reversed star power. One commentator joked, "She's the Clooney. He's just the guy holding the umbrella." The joke stung because it echoed truth. The umbrella moment from 2018 had become metaphorical. Meghan still holding the umbrella, Harry still standing beneath it. To be clear, Harry remained central to causes that mattered deeply to him. The Invictus Games in Dusseldorf in 2023 were a success, drawing praise for his dedication to veterans. His speeches about Diana's legacy resonated. He had not disappeared, but the global spotlight was less on him as an individual and more on him as Meghan's husband, or Diana's son. Rarely just Harry. By late 2024, speculation swirled about the future. Were they drifting apart professionally as a strategy or as a symptom of something deeper? Meghan, in an interview that autumn, brushed aside rumors. "We're a team. Always have been, always will be. But we also believe in supporting each other's individual passions." Her words were polished, diplomatic. But they did not silence the chatter. And Harry? He admitted in Spare that he still felt distant from his family, that the Commonwealth Day service in 2020 had been cold, and it felt cold. That wound remained. But critics noted he had traded one kind of coldness for another, estranged from his royal blood family, dependent on his chosen family dynamic, where even there, he risked being sidelined. The irony was brutal. Harry had titled his book Spare as an act of reclamation, a way to confront the word used against him since childhood. But the narrative that emerged from 2023 and 2024 twisted the word once more. He had shed the monarchy's hierarchy only to find himself in another. Once the spare to William, now, in the eyes of many, the spare to Meghan. As Andrew Morton, Diana's biographer, observed in a television interview, history has a cruel way of repeating itself. Harry was defined as spare in the palace. He may now be defined as spare in his marriage. The question is whether he accepts that role or fights it. The stage was set for the next act. Professional separation, personal evolution, and the looming question of what Harry's identity truly is outside the crown, outside the brand, and perhaps even outside his wife's shadow. By the time 2024 dawned, the dynamic of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex was no longer a mystery to the public. It had been scrutinized, dissected, mocked, and meme-ified to exhaustion. What was less clear was where they were headed. After the explosive memoir Spare, the Spotify implosion, and the uneven Netflix partnership, the couple faced a choice. Double down as a joint brand or carve out separate lanes. Increasingly, the answer appeared to be the latter. Observers began to notice it in subtle ways. Meghan appeared at conferences without Harry by her side, giving keynote speeches that were polished, confident, even glamorous. She spoke about women's empowerment, about representation in media, about her own journey. She quoted Maya Angelou, smiled at standing ovations, and posed with celebrities who seemed more Hollywood than royal. Harry, meanwhile, was photographed in New York, laying wreaths at 9/11 memorials, attending Well Child Awards in London, and delivering speeches tied to Princess Diana's legacy and the Invictus Games. He looked more comfortable in these moments, less like a reluctant supporting act, more like the soldier prince who once thrived when the cameras weren't focused on who held whose hand. Royal commentator Angela Levin told GB News, "Harry looks happier when he's alone. more natural, less defensive. Meghan, on the other hand, is thriving in her solo spotlight. It's as though they've realized their marriage works best when they don't have to share the stage professionally. Even in California, insiders whispered that Meghan had shifted focus. One source told The Times, Meghan's looking at her own ventures, brand partnerships, possibly even a lifestyle company. She doesn't want to be tethered only to Harry's story. She believes she has her own voice. For a woman once branded by the palace as difficult, it was a kind of vindication. Meghan was building her own empire, no longer constrained by tiaras or balcony etiquette. Harry, for his part, leaned into Invictus with renewed vigor. The 2023 Dusseldorf Games had been successful, praised for their inclusivity and emotional resonance. Athletes spoke of Harry's sincerity. "He gets it," said one veteran. "He's been there, he knows what we've been through." This was Harry at his most authentic, relating as a comrade, not as a prince, nor as Meghan's +1. But authenticity didn't always translate into headlines. Harry's projects were earnest, worthy, even admirable, but they lacked the glitz that Meghan seemed to attract effortlessly. When she gave a keynote speech in Los Angeles, glossy magazines covered her outfit, her hair, her message. When Harry met veterans in New York, the coverage was respectful but subdued. The imbalance was evident, and it fueled the perception that he had once again slipped into the shadow, not of William, this time, but of Meghan. And yet, paradoxically, their separation seemed to make them stronger as a couple, at least in public. People magazine ran a cover story titled, "Independently Together," praising their decision to support each other's passions while maintaining unity at home. Meghan herself told an interviewer, "We've always been a team. But part of being a team is knowing when to give each other space to grow." Critics, of course, read it differently. Royal biographer Tom Bower argued, "This is not strategy, it's survival." Their joint projects have failed. Their brand as a couple has diminished. So now they're splitting lanes in hopes that at least one of them can stay relevant. The word, relevance, haunted every article, every podcast analysis, every snarky tweet. What complicated matters further was the comparison with William and Catherine. While the Prince and Princess of Wales were carefully cultivating a future monarch image, measured, united, dutiful Harry and Meghan looked scattered, improvisational, hustling. To supporters, it made them authentic. To critics, it made them opportunists. As journalist Camilla put it, the contrast is stark. William and Kate represent continuity. Harry and Meghan represent chaos. The perception worsened with the release of industry gossip. Bill Simmons's infamous remark about the F***ing grifters at Spotify lingered. Even sympathetic outlets couldn't ignore the stumble. The Wall Street Journal ran a feature titled, "When the Sussexes Lose Their Shine," highlighting the gap between their $100 million Netflix deal and the modest output so far. The contradictions that had dogged them since 2020 were now a liability in Hollywood terms. Hype without follow-through. Still, the Sussexes pressed on. In 2024, Meghan teased new media ventures, possibly a return to acting, perhaps a brand in the lifestyle space reminiscent of Gwyneth Paltrow's Goop. Rumors swirled of a TIG 2.0, a resurrection of her pre-royal lifestyle blog. Meanwhile, Harry was spotted filming segments tied to his philanthropic work. The divergence was undeniable. What did it mean for their marriage? Supporters insisted it was healthy. "They're showing that you can be married and still independent," one fan tweeted after Meghan's speech in Manchester. But others saw cracks. Social media buzzed with speculation that they were slowly disentangling their professional identities as a prelude to something more personal. "They're not splitting up," one California insider told Vanity Fair. "But they are recalibrating. They realized they can't both be front and center at the same time." And then there was the Diana factor. Harry's solo speeches about his mother resonated deeply, reminding audiences why he once commanded global sympathy. In one emotional moment in New York, he said, "Everything I do with Invictus, everything I try to be as a father, is because of her. I lost her when I was 12. I refuse to lose myself too." The applause was heartfelt, but the subtext was haunting. Harry was still defining himself through others, through William, through Meghan, through Diana. Rarely through Harry alone. By early 2025, the professional separation was undeniable, but the future was unclear. Were they evolving into parallel stars who would occasionally reunite for joint appearances? Or were they drifting, each chasing different dreams, bound together more by necessity than passion? Meghan, ever polished, brushed off such questions with grace. People love to speculate. But at the end of the day, Harry and I know who we are. We know what we stand for. Yet the speculation persisted. Could Harry ever escape the curse of the spare? Or had he traded one hierarchy for another, forever second to someone else's story? The contradictions of their Hollywood exile had not vanished, they had merely been reframed. Now the question wasn't just whether they could thrive together. It was whether Harry could thrive at all, on his own terms, in a world that still saw him as spared to something greater. And as the Sussexes entered 2025, one reality was clear. Their story was far from over. The monarchy had lost them. Hollywood had embraced them. But whether history would remember Harry as liberated or diminished heir to his own destiny or forever the spare remained the gamble neither he nor Meghan could fully control. From Kensington Palace to Montecito, from the balcony of Buckingham to the cover of Time, the arc of Harry and Meghan has unfolded like a Shakespearean play complete with love, betrayal, ambition, and irony so thick it almost feels scripted. At its heart lies one theme: the curse of the spare. It has followed Harry from birth to middle age, reshaped his relationships, and haunted his every attempt at freedom. Once, he was the spare to William, the shadow sibling, the backup, the one born to support rather than rule. He spoke of it often in spare. I was the shadow, the plan B. I was brought into this world in case something happened to William. Those words defined him, and for decades he struggled to make sense of them. Military service gave him purpose. Invictus gave him meaning, but the title clung like a tattoo: spare. When Meghan entered his life, he believed he had found liberation. For a time, it looked true. Together they broke protocols, held hands in public, hugged strangers, declared their independence. They escaped the stiff corridors of the palace and built a new stage in California. But the irony was cruel. In leaving one hierarchy, Harry walked into another. In the palace, he was the spare to the heir. In Montecito, he increasingly looked like the spare to his wife's ambition. The images tell the story. The Time 100 cover with Meghan in front, Harry half hidden behind her shoulder. The Columbia tour where Meghan sparkled in bold colors while Harry clasped his hands in the fig leaf pose, nervous and subdued. The keynote speeches where Meghan dazzled on stage while Harry looked on, quiet, supportive, almost incidental. These were not isolated snapshots. They were chapters in a new narrative, one where Harry remained in the shadows, even outside the monarchy's walls. And yet, there is another side. Harry's solo work, his speeches about Diana, his presence at the Invictus Games, his visits with veterans and sick children reminds us of the man he could be when unburdened by either Windsor hierarchy or Sussex branding. When he spoke in New York about his mother, "Everything I do is because of her. I lost her when I was 12. I refused to lose myself too." The room was silent, transfixed. In those moments, Harry wasn't the spare. He was simply Harry. That duality, the man and the spare, the husband and the shadow, defines his existence. Meghan, for her part, has shown resilience, ambition, and a knack for narrative control. She has her critics, and many. But she has also carved space where none was given to her. If the monarchy saw her as an outsider, Hollywood saw her as an asset. In some ways, she embodies what Harry always longed for: the ability to write her own story. Together, they have courted contradiction. They left for privacy, then signed multi-million-dollar media deals. They criticized the monarchy's obsession with image, then curated images more intensely than any palace aide ever could. They said they wanted peace, then dropped bombs in interviews, books, and documentaries. Their contradictions do not erase their pain, but they do complicate their truth. And now, as 2025 stretches ahead, the question is no longer whether Harry and Meghan can thrive together. It is whether Harry can thrive at all on his own terms. He has lived as the spare in two worlds: the world of royalty and the world of celebrity. In both, he has found himself secondary, derivative, defined by someone else's spotlight. Is there a third world waiting for him, a space where Harry is not spare, not shadow, not accessory, but self? Or will history record him as doubly cursed, the spare to his brother, and the spare to his wife? As Andrew Morton, Diana's biographer, remarked, history has a cruel way of repeating itself. Diana was overshadowed by a system. Harry risks being overshadowed by a person. The outcome may be just as tragic. The tragedy, of course, is not yet written. The Sussexes continue to command headlines. Their critics continue to rage. Their supporters continue to defend. But at the heart of it all is one man, still wrestling with a word that will not leave him. Spare. The crown could not free him. California has not freed him. And so the final question lingers like an unwelcome echo. Will Harry ever stop being the spare, or is it the only role he was ever destined to play? Right finger subscribe now, because the story of the Sussexes,